first presentation, and that would be from Tim Karis from the University of Bochum in Germany. And he will be talking about the secular and the BBC in a paper on the inclusion of non-religious belief groups on the Thought of the Day program at the BBC. So welcome, Tim, and welcome to all of you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Henrik. I hope everyone can hear me. I appreciate your interest in this presentation, especially if you're from the US and it's very early in the morning as far as I can see. It's like 5 o'clock or something over there. So very happy to be here and appreciate you taking the time. I do hope we can see each other in person when the conference will be in Bochum in 2 years, so in our university, and I very much look forward to that. And I also thank you for the opportunity to kind of revisit my earlier work on this particular topic, the secular and the BBC. A new look at the Thought for the Day controversy. Those of you who are from the UK probably know what I will be talking about. Everyone else I will give some information, of course, in the talk. Some background, the project background, this was actually first, the idea came from a colleague of mine, Kerstin Rade-Antweiler and Xenia Zeiler, and they approached me actually in Canterbury when we were there a couple of years ago with this conference. And the idea was to look at terms that are somehow contested and look at those terms from a Western perspective and also from a non-Western perspective. And I was assigned to look at this term, the secular, and this is why I revisited, since the conference topic is on the secularities as well. And we looked at the term, my colleague Johanna Buss and I, first in the UK context and then in the Nepali context. So my part of the case study was on a radio segment. It's called Thought for the Day, and it's broadcast every day, Monday to Saturday at 7:50 a.m., which is of course radio prime time. It's a 3-minute segment within the Today program on BBC Radio 4, and it's been broadcast in some form actually since 1939. And it presents religious perspectives on issues of the day. It was Anglican or Christian only in the beginning, and then it gradually became a multi-religious format with Christian, Jewish, Buddhist, Hindu, Muslim, and Sikh contributors. However, their secular viewpoints are not featured. So specifically, secular viewpoints are not featured in the program, and this led to a conflict because there are secular groups in the UK, the National Secular Society and the British Humanist Association. They actually changed their name recently to, I think, Humanists UK, or what they're called now. But they have been campaigning for inclusion into this radio segment since the 1960s. And it's been a continuous struggle with the BBC ever since, and the BBC still insists on a religions-only policy for that particular radio segment. So basically we have a conflict between the BBC on the one hand and these secular groups on the other about inclusion into this radio segment. And this leads to my research question: how's the term secular filled by the opposing parties in the discursive space created by the conflict on Thought for the Day? My research material, this is a stock image, but it looked a bit like this because there's a lot of material actually about this conflict. There are letters that have been sent back and forth between the parties. There are reports where the BBC talks at length about why they are not including secular groups in this program. There are public statements from both sides, and there was even a select committee hearing in the House of Lords when this issue was actually brought to the House of Lords on one point, and I also analyzed the minutes from these hearings. So a lot of material, but I only looked at these 10 years, not at the whole conflict since the 1960s. So, and I found basically 5 different ways in which this term is filled, or lines of reasoning that revolve around this term secular. Number 1 would be secular as opposition to religion. And number 2, secular as absence of religion. And these two, of course, mirror in a way the academic debate that we have around the term secular. And these 2 ideas are brought forward by the BBC. Not surprisingly, of course, in this context. And the other 3 are well, championed by the secular groups. And I'm going to talk about more about each of them in the following. So number 1, I have to put your pictures somewhere else so I can actually read the slides. So the first, in a nutshell, is the idea that there's no need for secularists to be featured on Thought for the Day because they have the opportunity to criticize religion in other programs. So clearly there's this idea of secular being in opposition to religion. I have a quote from one of the sources. Outside Thought for the Day, the BBC's religious output maintains a balance of religious and non-religious voices. In these programs, the religious world is scrutinized, its leaders and proponents are questioned, and the harm done in the name of religion is explored. So this reflects this idea that secular means opposition to religion. Another quote is actually my favorite quote. It's a little bit like saying that there's a pet lover program on the BBC and they should give equal time to those who dislike pets. So this is the first line of reasoning, or the first way that this term is filled, secular as opposition to religion. The second is secular as absence of religion. And here, in a nutshell, the idea is that there's no need for secularists to appear on Thought for the Day because the whole of the BBC output, where not explicitly religious, is secular. So here, another quote. The idea is something like this. The vast swath of general programs make little reference to religion, but approach the world from an overwhelmingly secular perspective. For example, news, current affairs, documentaries, talks, science, history. So here the idea clearly is that everything is secular, so why would we need secular voices on Thought for the Day? Another quote. Thought for the Day is designed precisely to be a moment for religious and spiritual reflection in the middle of an entirely secular program. So you really have these 2 ideas of secular in the BBC reasoning. Of course, the secular groups have different ideas. Number 1 is this idea of secular as irrelevance of religion. Again, in a nutshell, the secular viewpoint cannot be reduced to an oppositional stance towards religion. Rather, religion is an irrelevance to secularists. A quote, this is actually from the Select Committee evidence. For humanists and for man in his natural state almost, religion is an irrelevance. We do not define ourselves by reference to religion. The fourth idea, secular belief systems are equals or equal religions. This is where the British Humanist Association and the National Secular Society argue, again, in a nutshell, it is inappropriate to consider all non-religious output of the BBC secular, since secular refers not to a sphere of non-religiousness, but to a distinct belief system in its own right. This is a longer quote from a position paper of the British Humanist Association. And it says, the term secular is being misused by the BBC, as we have seen in this talk already, to suggest that a humanist thought would be properly categorized as analogous to the news, sport, and weather, rather than suited to Thought for the Day. However, this meaning originates in the contrast between the eternal concerns of religion and the merely temporal, secular ones of everyday life. In that sense, humanist thought is not ephemeral, but belongs to eternity. So, and finally, the fifth way that secular groups argue in this conflict, this is actually something that only comes from the British Humanist Association, not so much from the National Secular Society. Unknowingly, many non-religious people hold humanist beliefs. Here's a quote in that direction. The majority of people without religious beliefs, when they hear what humanism is, they say that they have unknowingly long been humanists themselves. Or this is actually a letter from the BHA president to the BBC head at the time. People encountering us for the first time reacted with something like joy. So you can see an almost religious ring to that line of argument that you find here. Now, in conclusion, we have a conflict, as I said, between the BBC on the one hand and these groups on the other, but we have also see that we have these 5 conflicting views, and they, of course, on the one hand, the views that the BHA and NSS have react to the views or are in conflict with the lines of reasoning that the BBC puts forward. But on the other hand, within these groups, we have arguments that seem to be in conflict with each other. Of course, if a secular means a particular stance of opposition to religion, it cannot be at the same time that the news program and the weather and the sports program reflect this idea of secularism. And on the other hand, if secular is irrelevant, or if religion is irrelevant to secular groups, it's kind of hard to argue that it's a belief system in the same way that religions are. And also, if secular has this idea of a universal value, it's also hard to argue that it's the same thing like these complex belief systems that they also claim to be. So well, if you want to read this again in more detail, it's published in the Journal of Religion, Media and Digital Culture. You can also see there the article that Johanna Buss has written on the situation in Nepal, where she talks about the situation where the Nepali state is actually now just recently been declared a secular state when it was a Hindu kingdom before. And of course, we also talk about how our findings reflect the academic debate on the term secular, as it's put forward by Charles Taylor, by Talal Asad, and others. All right, so that's it for me, and back to Henrik.
Thank you very much, Tim, and that was very much on time. So we have time for questions. If you have questions of clarification or something you would like to discuss with Tim, you can. I see that we are more people than can actually be seen on my screen. So if you could also make a note of it in the chat, then it would be easier to have a whole view of everybody here instead of using the raise hand tool. Unless this is something with Zoom that will put people in the top left corner if they use the raise hand tool, so we can always see who has raised the hand first. I think perhaps this is the way Zoom works. So if any of you have questions for Tim, please let us know. And otherwise, I would like to start actually, Tim. I didn't quite get why this discussion turned up in the first place. So why do the humanist associations want to be included in the thought of the day? Is it to critique religion, which is somehow why I think that the BBC reacts as they do, or is it to make or have some reflections based on humanist ideas or human rights based ideas? So is it for creating reflections or kind of provoking religious people?
Thank you. That's a good question. I did not look at material from the start of the debate in the 60s, which would be very interesting, as a follow-up, also to see how these lines of reasoning are developing in the different conflict parties. I do know that at some point it just became a thing, like a cause célèbre. So they are fighting for this just because they have been fighting for this for such a long time that they are just continuing. Then again, it would be important to see, or I would guess that especially in the beginning, the idea of criticizing religion would be, more prominent. But now, what they say, why they want in, is this idea that, I think it's one of my points there, that they say, okay, our worldview is a worldview that is on par with religious worldviews. Weltanschauung, you would say in German. So why should religions be privileged with these 3 minutes they have every day to talk about how they see the world, when no one else, as long as they don't believe in transcendent beings, for example, if that is the criterion. So why wouldn't be in there as well? So that's, I guess, what they would say now. But I do not know how prominent this idea was in the beginning.
Okay, thanks. Well, raise some questions about how BBC conceptualizes religion in contrast to how other actors conceptualize religion. Thank you. And I have Michael has a question as well.
Yeah, thank you very much. Good to see everybody. Tim, thanks. I got two questions, if I could. And one of them is about the effect when you have this array of responses that they have, which is there a fear for the campaigners who want to have secularist or humanist inclusion in the space that they're talking past each other by using these different understandings of the secular? Does that hinder their goals, which kind of gets that academic question of when we can settle on an agreed vocabulary, then it's easier to confront the real claim that they're making. Is that a possibility, do you think, and what are the effect of this diversity of perspectives in the use of secular? My second question, if I could, was just about the journalists themselves who have made also some critical statements about it. I mean, John Humphreys, when he left the Today program, was really saying that, oh, the thought for the day needs to just go, it's irrelevant, and it shouldn't be on a program like Today on BBC4 anyway. So what effect, you wonder whether the attitudes of the journalists who are presenting on the program have to the decisions about the slot in the program?
Thanks, Mike. I don't know how in how far the secular groups are aware that they have, that they are not very that they're not entirely on the same page when they argue for for inclusion. They have these three different ways to argue, and I would think it probably doesn't help them to be included, but it's on the other hand, it's probably not the main reason. It's somehow also on the BBC side, it's just something that they don't want, and they want to give up. At the same time, as you said, there are voices coming every now and then where the program is criticized. Just a couple of years ago, someone said, "Oh, it's this boring thing that kind of interrupts the program. So you have like a general interest news program, and then all of a sudden you have 3 minutes of spiritual reflection, and people would switch off the radio. It often happens. So it's not like they're super happy about this, but at the same time it's been there forever. And I don't know, I'm not inside the BBC. I didn't talk to any journalists about this, but I would think if you compare it to the German situation, where I know more about, it's like this thing that they don't want to touch. They don't want to start, and because the churches would of course be complaining, and then people would everywhere, journalists and whoever would make this a whole thing and discuss it. And this, I think, is similar in the UK as well. So they want to keep it as it is. It's been around since 1939, as I said. So just don't change it now, and just keep going. This is my idea how this is working, but I'm not sure.
Thanks a lot.
Well, thank you, Tim. I don't see any more questions, so I think we will thank you for your presentation and listen from our next presenter, who is Valentina Laferrara from the University in Barcelona and the Blancana Observatory of Media, Religion and Culture. And you have been working on freedom of religion and belief in Spanish digital media, and will present your work on discrimination and intolerance and Laicism in the Spanish digital sphere. So welcome, Valentina, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Henrik. I will share my screen. So, I'm sorry. Here, can you see it there? Yes, okay. So, yes, the paper that I'm presenting today is called, it's a research that we made in the Blancana Observatory of Media, Religion and Culture of the Ramon University. It's called Laicism, Intolerance and Discrimination. How does the Spanish digital media cover the rights of freedom of religion and belief? First of all, I would like to start with some context that gives sense to this research. As we all know, the freedom of religion and belief is a fundamental right that is protected by international, national, and regional laws, but it is still being infringed in different ways and by different actors. In Spain, in particular, attacks to its rights are constantly increasing. They have multiplied by 7 between 2014 and 2018. And although their overall number has decreased in 2019, in this same year, violence against believers and attacks to places of worship have increased. We also know that recently the Interior Minister of Spain announced that there is an increase of hate crimes in the country. There is 9.3% more of hate crimes in the country in the first half of 2020 compared to the same period in 2019. And in numbers, we're talking about 610 hate crimes, and most of them are because of racism, ideology, and sexual orientation. We also know that these fundamental rights can conflict with other fundamental rights, such as the right to freedom of expression and to information, that are two rights mostly exercised by the media. And we also know that the media can focus, as the framing theory suggests, the media can make that the audience perceives this information in a certain way and draws its attention to a particular issue. So that's why we consider that it's very important to study how the media addresses all these infringements, violations, or attacks to the fundamental right of freedom of expression and belief. Of freedom of religion and belief. So we focused on these two objectives. The first one is to provide a snapshot of how the Spanish media covers these infringements to the freedom of religion and belief in the Spanish territory, in order to provide some recommendations for the media coverage of this content related to the right, considering some previous works, such as the one, for example, like the one of Hoover or the one of Cohen. So the methodology we used we consulted 19 Spanish digital media and 18 social religious web portals of reference. We collected all the information that had to do with an infringement, a violation, or an attack to the freedom of religion and belief between January 1st, 2019 and July 30, 2020. We collected all the information that had to do with a religion, but also with a belief, even though it's not considered a religion. And we collected all the information that had to do with something that happened inside the Spanish territory. We did it by using some keywords that were validated in previous research. And we collected 171 cases of which we made a quantitative analysis, but we also made a qualitative analysis focused on 9 cases and 41 publications. So the results are the ones that follow. And the most important result of this research is this one that we can see in the screen, is that most of the cases, more than a half, were about cases of intolerance. This means disrespectful, belligerent, or offensive attitudes against a religion or a belief of a person, a group of persons, or a community. The second type of infringement to this right were discriminations, that we have 15.2% of the cases, that are cases in which a person, a group of persons, or a community is treated differently than others in a comparable situation because they belong to a particular religion or to a particular belief. And third, we found that 8.2% of the cases had to do with cases of radical Laicism. This means anti-religious attitudes that aim to impose a neutrality or a radical secularism in the public space. We didn't find any case of genocide nor persecution. So we also had these categories, but we didn't find anything in the media. So then we ask how the media addresses these types of infringements to the fundamental rights. So we found that Catalonia, Madrid, and Andalusia were the ones that had the most presence in the media. We find this very, we find that this has sense if we take into account that these 3 autonomous communities are the ones that have most places of worship and the more variety of religions, of religious communities. We also found that Catholicism is the confession that is more present in the Spanish media and the social religious websites. This acquires sense if we take into account that more or less 66% of the Spanish population consider themselves as Catholic. We also found Islam as a very important percentage. And religious in general, this means not attacks or infringements to one religion, but to religions, to all the religions in general. Then we found some other religions like Judaism or Sikhism that had less space in the media, and well, we found atheism and Pastafarism, for example, that were present also in the media, but in a very, very low percentage. So another thing that we asked ourselves was what was the frame that mostly appeared in the media? Vandalisms, desecrations of or destructions of places of worship was the topic that mostly appeared in the media. For example, paintings in churches or other places of worship. We also found that impediments of all types appeared a lot in the media. For example, in the display of religious symbols, the access to jobs or to education, to certain types of jobs and educations, the death ceremonies and the places of worship, impediments to, for example, to make some ceremony inside a place of worship. But we also found a high percentage of cases that had to do with hate speeches and apologies of crimes. The other categories were a bit low. And we asked also ourselves who did these attacks, who was responsible of these attacks. And we found that society in general is the one that the media says is responsible of these attacks. It is followed by the state. This means authorities or people who is in charge of public organizations. And in third place, we found opinion leaders from different areas, such as artists or journalists, for example, or fathers or institutions, for example. Then we made a qualitative analysis. I put it here I put here two examples. The first one we can see, for example, I will explain it quickly, but in the first one we can see, for example, that the journalist confuses the term burqa with hijab. That was the thing that this woman that he says here was actually wearing. But he also, not only this, but he also, he or she, we don't know who is the journalist, makes an association between the Islam and something hidden or something that is dark, because he says that this woman that is from the Islam community hides something. And in the second example, we can see, for example, that the media uses an inappropriate and the contextualized image to illustrate a controversial thing, a controversial issue, such as the pedestry inside the Vatican. So some conclusions about what I was saying is that intolerance is a type of infringement that acquires more presence in the media, in the Spanish media, but discrimination and radical Laicism also have a very important place. And we could not identify in the media cases of genocide or persecution. Catholicism is the most mentioned religion, and other religions, minority religions, do not have enough place in the media. We also found that impediments of all types, vandalism, desecration, and destruction of places of worship were the most referred topics between these cases that we collected. But also we can conclude from the qualitative analysis that the media uses inappropriate images and controversial terms to refer to the freedom of religion and belief and to religious communities in general. And they promote also religious stereotypes, as the one we could see with the woman that belongs to the Islam community. We also found that they didn't give a lot of attention, a lot of place to people that are from religious communities, and that they didn't mention any regulation in relation to the freedom of religion and belief. So we made some recommendations for the media to cover these issues. The first one is to maintain an active role in covering incidents against the FORB. We could see that these 171 cases coincided with some reports that said that those years, that period that we analyzed, in that period that we analyzed, we could register in Spain this number of incidents to the freedom of religion and belief. So we think that the media are reporting actively this. The second recommendation is to represent the variety of existing religious communities, also the minority ones, to check whether the terms or expressions correctly describe the type of incidents against the freedom of religion and belief, or something that is of the religious community, some custom of the religious community, to modify the published content if it is found to infringe the rights or to promote a religious stereotype, as we could see in the image I put as an example, to correct that if you think, if you realize that is not properly, then to refer to to regulations protecting the rights. So in order to give context to this and to let people know what is the freedom of religion and belief actually, and to ensure that this is one that engrows all the other ones, to ensure the trainings for religious journalists in order to let all the other things happen. So well, that's from me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Valentina, for your presentation, and for I don't know, could you, before I take any questions, I would like to know what has happened in Spain since we see this sevenfold increase in just 1.5 years? Is this something to do with migration or the COVID-19? Why has we seen this enormous increase in such short time? Could you give some background on the Spanish context for this?
I don't know actually why this happened, but I think that maybe it could be because of the immigration that had increased the last year and a half, and well, I think that intolerance is higher since the pandemic. So I think that this is another issue, an important issue in all this. Yes.
Okay, well, thank you. It's just striking that it has been such an explosive increase in these infringement on the freedom of religion. Thank you for your presentation. And as far as I can see, we do not have a lot of questions. So I think we can actually just move on to the next speaker, and to Aya Yadlin-Segal from Israel, who will also talk about digital media, especially about the way the Israeli Persian community used digital media to negotiate Jewish civil religion in your presentation. So, Aya, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the introduction, Henrik, and thank you all for joining us here today. So today I'll be presenting a short presentation about rethinking the past and rebuilding a civil religion. And the main point I'll be discussing today is the duality of online media usage by minority groups in the context of civil religion, where I'll be presenting the term affirmative opposition. This is a process in which, on the one hand, online spaces allow members of minority groups to negate dominant exclusionary narratives, where on the other hand, the very same acts mean that members of minority groups take part in maintaining the dominant narratives that marginalize them. How did I get there? How did I get to this concept? So I conducted a 3.5 years long multi-sided ethnography that explored online and offline platforms. This was done in an effort to understand the national sense of belonging constructed by Jewish Iranian immigrants in Israel. Materials in this larger project were collected through observations, participant observations, interviews, and systematic text collection online and offline, and were where the data was thematically analyzed, the single corpus to identify and decode patterns of collective and shared meanings and experiences through the prism of new media and diaspora studies. Materials presented in this presentation today shed light on a smaller segment related to this project out of one theme constructed as a finding, focusing specifically on negotiating the past and its memory in relations to civil religion. In the larger project, the issue of collective memory found additional manifestations, where today this presentation touches specifically on collective memory and civil religion in the context of Holocaust commemoration in Israel. But before we dive into the findings and discussion, here is a very short leap review. A central concept in the study of Jewish nationality in Israel is that of civil religion. The term is used to explain the religious and religious-like components that exist in the national context as the means of nation building. The term puts forward the commonalities between the state, which is in general a non-religious apparatus, and religion itself. Don Yechia, an Israeli scholar, explains the term in the following way. The common between traditional and civil religion is the sacred dimension, expressed as a sense of awe and commitment to the sacred objects. These two types of religion also ask to mold the character and give meaning to the existence of the individual and society, and fulfill the roles of unity, of legitimacy, and political mobilization for its social and political systems. It is important to open the discussion on civil religion with a clarification about the Israeli context. With the establishment of the state, the Zionist movement asked to construct a secular society that was clearly distinguished from the religious Jewish community in diaspora. Over the years, the Jewish national civil religion drew on multiple sources to legitimize the Jewish state. Scholars point out different components of this civil religion, such as military, agricultural, diaspora life, and the Jewish religion. Central component highlighted in this context is the yearly calendar. Alongside religious holidays such as Passover and the high holidays, the Jewish civil religion constructed civil holidays and days of observance. Chief among these are the Israel Independence Day, Memorial Day, and Holocaust Remembrance Day. The main narrative of this Israeli Jewish civil religion revolved around a voluntary key, privileging acts of heroism and self-sacrifice carried by members of the national Jewish community. This was also the main narrative of Holocaust remembrance for many decades in Israel, where acts of rebellion and heroism were prioritized in Israeli dominant commemoration discourses. And while Israeli Holocaust commemoration discourses have changed dramatically over the last 7 decades, one feature has remained relatively fixed over time. Over the last 7 decades, Mizrahi communities suffered exclusion from memory narratives of Holocaust events. This was experienced as part of an overall exclusion from narratives of Jewish nationality governed by an Ashkenazi European cultural heritage in Israel society. Mizrahi memories related to the Holocaust in Greece, in Libya, in Tunisia, Morocco, Syria, Lebanon, and the Balkans, for example, were often referred to as a side note, as they were not present at the center of events in Europe. Media representations of Holocaust events in Mizrahi communities were also lacking, described in scholarly writing as a site of amnesia. Scarcity of visual references to the experiences of Mizrahi Jewry during the Holocaust was evident in cinema and art, pointing at the overall misperception of the events outside of Europe. Hence, we are urged to look at communities outside the European dominant Holocaust commemoration to further understand both dominant and marginalized voices in this context. The Persian community in Israel is one such example. The current presentation explores the Persian community's memory-making practices in the context of Holocaust remembrance as a case study representing marginalized Mizrahi groups' voices in Holocaust remembrance in Israel. Jewish Iranian immigrants to Israel are also dubbed the Persian community. Jewish Iranian immigrants are based on their ethnic Persian identity marker in Israel. Members estimate that approximately 250,000 Israelis of Iranian origin live in Israel today, first, second, and third generation immigrants. Through the years, the Iranian immigrants were included under the Mizrahi ethnic category, where Mizrahim or Mizrahi in Hebrew literally means Eastern, and perceived by the absorbing Israeli society and other European immigrant communities as allegedly inferior. One vivid example was, and to a large extent still is, the exclusionary representation of Mizrahi groups in Israeli mainstream media. In this context, less is known about how Mizrahi communities represent themselves as a whole and in the context of the Holocaust in particular. So when I turned to study the issue in the community's online presence, the topic of Holocaust remembrance was namely discussed by members around the time of the Israeli Holocaust Remembrance Day, which is considered to be the prime time of the civil religion calendar. The two specific cases that I'm about to discuss are small in volume, that is, within the analyzed corpus of thousands of posts and comments, only some 150 items were specifically interested in the issue of collective memory of the Holocaust as related to Iranian narratives, yet the smaller segment of discussions, as I will show in the remaining of this presentation, do help us in gaining important insight into the issue of Mizrahi memories of the Holocaust and the place, positive and negative, of social media in allowing spaces for alternative narratives of the past and changing dominant narratives of civil religion in Israel. Here I address the stories of the Iranian Schindler, Abdul Hussein Sardari, and that of Tehran children. The two cases, although particular in nature, represent the wish of the community to broaden commemoration practices in Israel as a marker of inclusion and openness. The Persian angle of Holocaust commemoration includes references to events in which Iranians, Jewish and non-Jewish, saved Jewish people from Nazi persecution during World War II. These include reflections on past events that historically were not and are not contemporarily either actually highlighted in Israeli dominant Holocaust remembrance discourse. These, I argue, are representative of the new negotiation spaces that have opened online for minority groups, an important site of analysis as they show how individual media users, not only official cultural heritage institutions, help shape the present through negotiation of the past. The first important case that highlights negotiations of remembrance is the account of Abdul Hussein Sardari, Iran's consul in Nazi-occupied Paris, whose experiences were discussed by members of the community. In one such case, a community member shared a link in a community Facebook group studied in this project, stating that this was information community members should have on a Persian Muslim who saved Persian Jews throughout the Holocaust. The link included in the post led to the story of Parisian Iranian Jewry during the 1930s and 1940s, sharing newly revealed information about the era. The main character in the story is Abdul Hussein Sardari, who played a significant role in the lives of Persian Jews in France. And the post on Facebook stated, but how did Iranian Jews escape Nazi harassment in France without fleeing back to their own country? Sardari sought to use the Nazis' own racialist ideology against them, wholeheartedly embracing the Aryan race identity for Iranians to argue that Iranian Jews were not Jews by blood, but rather Aryan Iranians who followed the religion of Moses. Thus, he maintained Iranian Jews were not members of the European Jewish race and should not be subjected to Nazi Jewish policies. Sardari also issued Iranian passports to non-Iranian Jews in France and overall maintained this process. While still focused on Europe, this story places both Iranian Jewish people and Iranian government officials of that era as part of the historical narrative of the Holocaust. By highlighting the Iranian identity of both the Jewish community and Sardari, members were able to adopt the hegemonic narrative of heroic acts throughout the Holocaust and to highlight the importance of their own ethnic identification within the Holocaust memory. The case of Sardari articulation of Iranian Judaism is distinctive as it positions the Jewish Iranian community as closer in identification to the Persian Iranian ethnicity. These narratives of remembrance construct an understanding of the Holocaust outside of dominant civil religion discourses, outside of the Jewish-centered perspective on religion, and stretches the identification of Jewish communities in these historical times. Members of the Facebook groups analyzed in the study addressed another case related to the Holocaust. The story of Tehran children was brought up several times throughout the research period, positioning the Persian Jewish community as central to the narrative of the Jewish revival in Israel. Tehran children, according to members of the Persian Facebook groups, were about 700 Jewish Polish children, most of them orphans, who fled Nazi terror and arrived in Tehran after several months of hiding in the Soviet Union. In a discussion about this story, members highlighted the fact that Tehran children were the first and biggest organized group of Holocaust survivors to immigrate to Israel from Nazi-occupied Europe during the war. Emphasizing this point in time, according to community members, means that the Persian Jewish community in Iran not only took part in rescue efforts, but also the community was also the first group to do so. Here, members portray themselves as pioneers in the spirit of Zionist social-cultural narrative of Jewish revival in Israel. Members continuously stressed that the Iranian Jewish community, in fact, had better grasp on the situation than the society in Israel, By suggesting this, members not only included the Iranian Jewish community in the remembrance narrative, but also positioned it as more active, aware, and in control than the observing society, the same society that for many decades excluded the marginalized Persian community itself. In this case, the community, similarly to mainstream official memory agents, highlighted features in the narrative in light of their values, their personal history, and common aims. Considering the place of Holocaust in the Jewish national civil religion, the Persian community situated itself as an integral and central part of the building of Israeli society through the very specific, some might say inaccurate even, reading of the past. Yet, as shown by scholars, this collective memory of Tehran children is rare and not often spoken or acknowledged in Israeli mainstream discourse. Thus, social media allow for alternative narratives of the past to be discussed, yet not ones that put the memory of the Holocaust at risk. Some conclusions. The two stories shared by community members, even if not fully explored and verified, teach us about the community's social, cultural, and political struggles. The importance of the cases discussed in this presentation today lies in community members' ability to transcend social, cultural, and ethnic exclusion by negotiating historic narratives online. On the one hand, Holocaust commemoration constructed by members of the Persian community challenges to some extent the hegemonic accounts of Holocaust discourse in Israel. By referring to Iranian involvement in World War II, members of the Persian community expanded the mainstream discourse to include non-European communities in the historical narrative and civil religion. Online members of the Persian community helped recover the social amnesia surrounding the stories related to Mizrahi Jewish communities during the Holocaust. On the other hand, by emphasizing acts of active opposition to Nazi occupation, members reaffirm heroism as a signifier of importance in the Israeli commemoration narrative. By using the dominant normative communication practice, members also reaffirm the oppression they seek to oppose. Here they have recreated the normative heroic belonging to the Jewish history, only now they are able to position themselves on the correct or favored end of the spectrum, the European heroic one. Arguably, while online media do allow users to push back against mainstream narratives and create inclusion in dominant narratives, these outlets also enable to reaffirm existing oppressions. This dual process can be seen as affirmative opposition, showing that while some opposition forms negate negative misconceptions about the oppressed groups, it can simultaneously repeat and confirm the social narrative that established the very same oppression. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Aya, for your presentation of this specific perspective. Could you unshare your screen so that I can see if people have questions? And while people think about questions, I must admit that I'm not know that much about the Israeli context. It's so many years ago since I've been there, but how does the official Israel react to these other ways of negotiating the past or thinking about the Eastern Jews' way of rethinking these civil religious things? Is there a reaction from the official?
Official heritage institutions actually don't. They do acknowledge these communities, but as I said, it's a side note of the overall narrative that exists in Israeli society. It's not just in the context of Holocaust commemoration, but this is one arena that is really highlighted in the civil religion context. In other terms, these communities were marginalized over the years in the educational system, in the military, in politics, like state politics and personal politics. It has been overall the main, the way the state addressed this topic is by basically marginalizing Mizrahi communities and voices. Yeah.
Thank you. Johanna, you have a question.
Yes, thank you for this very interesting presentation. I have two questions for you. The first one is a kind of a conceptual one, and I was just thinking, since this concept of civil religion, which is quite widely used, but nevertheless it is created and established in the US context. So if you could kind of elaborate a bit on the transformation of this, of using this concept in another, you mentioned about that, but I would like to hear a bit more about that, how you, the process of you deciding to use that concept and the kind of a pros and cons in that sense. And then as my a second question, could you elaborate a bit more on the digital dimension on your research, the practices that you were able to grasp, and your own role as an ethnographer in this work?
I'm a really big methods geek, so I'm so glad you asked that question. The first question about civil religion, I think the reason I decided to use this specific term in the Israeli context is not unique. This is actually a concept or a term that is used to differentiate between Judaism as a religion and Judaism as a nationality. One can be Jewish both in, so one has to be Jewish both in religion and in nationality in Israel. And the reason I specifically decided to use this term is to distinguish discussions about religion, which exist in the groups that I've studied, but are not the main ones, and discussions about ethnicity and nationality, which use the term Judaism as well. So maybe this term of civic religion became a way for me to distinguish between Judaism as a religion and Judaism as a national context. That being said, there is a difference between the way it's used in the US and in Israel, because there's a strong tie between Judaism as nationality, although it's secular, and Judaism as religion. You have to be Jewish in your religion in order to be Jewish in your nationality in Israel. So if you're not, you cannot be defined as, you can be defined as Arab in your nationality, although that's an ethnic definition. But really, I don't think that we have the time to try and decode this, the meanings of this very, very complicated issue. But it is a term that helps us differentiate between religion and nationality in the scholarly context. I hope I answered the first question. For the second question, are you more interested in the protocols, like in the methods that I've been using, or?
You can choose the way you want to answer this question.
Over 3.5 years, I've took part in both online and offline community meetings and groups. I've studied Farsi online with the community members. I took part in discussions. I've conducted some 100 interviews that some of them happened face-to-face, offline in field work, and some of them happened online. Way before Zoom was so integral to our lives, I was using these kind of platforms to gain an understanding of the topic, and it was multi-sided because of the nature of our existence online. So one post on Facebook can lead me, or actually did, led me to other platforms, blogs, personal websites, and so on. So I kind of had to move between very different spaces in online settings, but also offline, where I've met with community members, and this enormous corpus of data was analyzed together. The interviews, the online texts that I was able to reach, like blogs and Facebook posts and stuff like that, to try and understand the main perspectives of the community on nationality and ethnicity. And today's presentation was a very, very, very small part of that. Thank you for the question.
Well, thank you, Aya and Johanna, for your questions. It's so easy to sit and moderate this panel because everybody is keeping time and I don't have to enforce it very strictly. So last but not least, I would like to give the word to Katja Valaskivi from the University of Helsinki, where she researches social change and hybrid media events with a perspective to the religious dimension as well. And I think, as far as I could see from your title, Katja, you will talk about the way news organizations actually manage different ways of knowing in your presentation. So the floor is yours.
Well, yes, thank you. I'm not talking about news organizations specifically. This is a fairly, I think, theoretical thought experiment. I just noticed that my internet connection might be unstable. I hope it doesn't affect you hearing what I'm saying, but I'll do my best and try to go through what I've prepared. And I would like to thank for this opportunity to jump in, because there was a cancellation and I was asked to fill in. I will start by sharing my screen. Can you see it now? My presentation, Epistemic Hierarchies and Secularization, Contestations of Hegemonic Forms of Knowledge in the Hybrid Media Environment. So I will start with some background. In his Temenos lecture recently published in the journal Temenos, David G. Robertson discusses epistemic capital. His lecture and article focus on renewing the principle setting of religious studies. And this is not my focus or purpose here, but his talk inspired, I was inspired by his idea of epistemic capital and the recognizable hierarchies there are between different forms of epistemic capital. So I'm trying to sketch some ideas on how these hierarchies are related to secularization and the media environment. And as I said, this is work in progress, some initial steps towards an argument. So I'm very happy if you have any comments or feedback that might help in formulating my thoughts further. Okay, let me try to move forward. Okay, so the pandemic continues to produce masses of data for studying epistemic hierarchies and their contestations. Together with colleagues, I am running 3 related research projects where we look into mostly conspiracy theories in different parts of the internet, including the dark web. And our approach is both multi-method and interdisciplinary, and our data is from different platforms and different forms of media, and it's mostly English and Finnish in language, but I will not spend time in describing the data. If there are questions about that, I'm happy to answer later on. So background. Modernization theory, I think this is the first time it's mentioned in this session. It needs to be mentioned at least in one presentation. So the modernization theory, as we know, it sees the society functionally with differentiation of different institutions, each with certain tasks. There's culture, religion, economy, politics, media, and the corresponding institutions. And the theory has been challenged by certain long-term developments that are in fact also part of the modernization process or historical process itself. Individualization, secularization, globalization, as well as mediatization are seen as blurring the boundaries between subsections of society. With these developments and growth of educational levels, as well as with expanding possibilities for communication, the internet, the technology, the power of epistemic authorities, those that were seen as authorities in these subsections, So journalists and religious institutions and educational institutions and so on, epistemic authorities, researchers, experts, journalists, professionals, they are being constantly challenged. So we could say that the so-called democratization of knowledge production processes challenge epistemic authorities and contest hierarchies between different knowledge forms. The secularization thesis is one that posits religion and belief in opposition with science and education, and has claimed, for instance, that with raising educational and modernization, raising educational levels and modernization, religion will fade away. Well, we know that this it hasn't happened and is not happening, and there are theories of post-secular society to somehow amend this kind of maybe weakness in the modernization theory. But the starting points of the modernization theory are with a tendency for clear-cut categories, and these clear-cut categories are being challenged with many of the contemporary conditions that we are experiencing, including the media environment. So just a couple of words about the hybrid media environment, without implying that technology and media are the only or even the most important starting point for these described developments. The interest in this talk is in the relationship between media and epistemic hierarchies, so I will say a few words about the hybrid media environment. Certain developments of the media environment have been described with the concept of hybridity. They contribute to a situation where epistemic hierarchies are widely being contested publicly. In general, these phenomena include such as the digitalization, datafication, and deep mediatization, as well as intertwining media practices between professional and social media, the global interconnectedness brought by communication technologies, and different types of emerging social technical practices evolving from the new combinations of human and technological actors interacting. If we talk about epistemic hierarchies, this very empirical question that was asked by a natural scientist colleague of mine, he was sincerely wondering why people would not trust the best experts. Well, social sciences and religious studies offer a plethora of obvious answers, ranging from human need to seek meaning and explanations best experts cannot give, especially if you don't trust them. Well, there are socio-psychological theories on group behavior and confirmation bias and so on. Media theories can illuminate through emphasizing algorithmic circulation of contents that provide a fruitful environment for seeking alternative sources of information. These are all the kinds of explanations that are kind of trying to answer the question, why wouldn't people just trust the best experts? But here I will not go into these theories any deeper, but move on to talking about the epistemic hierarchies and contestations in relation to the media environment. So let me change the slide. Okay, here we go. So it is not a coincidence that one of the slogans of the QAnon conspiracy narrative has been, do your own research. This is a call for individuals of an individualized time. The hope and belief in finding one's own truth is one of the driving forces behind the epistemic contestations. These contestations can use forms of knowledge or epistemic capital that are generally seen as illegitimate. David Robertson notes that these are illegitimate for religious studies. I think also they are illegitimate also wider in our shared implicit understanding of epistemic hierarchies. Let me talk about epistemic hierarchies then. then next. So, okay. So the collective understanding of knowledge and epistemic capital that we perceive is hierarchical. And Robertson identifies three forms of recognized epistemic capital. Scientific knowledge is the most hegemonic one, generally acknowledged as the superior form of knowledge production in modernized Western societies. And this is also considered secular knowledge. It is knowledge that is not associated with belief or religion. But then we also have traditional knowledge, and cultural and religious traditions, especially the ones maintained by institutions, are seen as self-evidently legitimate form of epistemic capital. In the Nordic countries, these institutions, this traditional knowledge form is represented by the evangelic Lutheran churches, which still have a strong foothold, although the memberships have been declining, as you probably know. Then experience is kind of a borderline. In some cases, it's recognized and considered as legitimate, for instance, in the form of expert by experience knowledge. But it also gains room in countering hegemonic forms of epistemic capital. Everybody is an expert through one's own experiences. A conspiracy narrative can feel true even if there is no scientific proof. And this is utilized, for instance, in vaccination debates. If you think of the statistics that the epistemic authorities are trying to convince us with, and you contrast that with the potential experience of having some harmful effects, it is a very if you prioritize experience, then it's very hard for you to rely on the scientific knowledge on vaccination. Okay, then yes, we talked about doing our own research, and if we go then to the illegitimate forms of epistemic capital, let me just try to find my notes. So they include channeled knowledge, gaining knowledge from spiritual beings, the dead, aliens, and so forth. They include illegitimate forms of epistemic capital, also include synthetic and intuitive forms of knowledge, conspiracy narratives, for instance, in our data. Vaccine refusers claim that scientists have lost touch with their intuition, and trust produce unreliable knowledge and give unreliable advice because they are unable to use their intuition. Then there is an oppositional and counter knowledge that explicitly sets itself as an alternative. It explicitly challenges hegemonic understandings and claims to have special, better knowledge. What does then contesting these hegemonic forms of knowledge, what is it about then? It can take the form of challenging epistemic authorities directly, undermining journalist institutions, questioning the integrity of teachers, claiming that decision makers are corrupt, and using conspiracy theories in using this. For instance, in conspiracy theories, this contestation can choose to rely on the described illegitimate forms of knowledge, but also to utilize the hegemonic forms of knowledge for legitimizing claims of special knowledge. For instance, making scientific experiments, using scientific methods of proof of a conspiracy narrative. For instance, you've probably heard of the flat Earth conspiracy theory. They experiment, make a lot of experiments trying to show that the country, the globe actually is flat. So the claims for special knowledge are important here. They are the way to argue for liberation of the oppressed who are in a, harnessed by the wrong knowledge. So the liberation of the oppressed can happen through a revolution of knowledge with the help of a new elite of conspiracists. The contestation of epistemic forms of knowledge is boosted by the algorithmic hybrid media environments that escalate circulation of affective contents that conspiracy theories typically are. The circulation is a social phenomenon, not an individual one, although the call to do one's own research is for an individual. Conscious political utilization of this contestation of hegemonic forms of knowledge takes place both in domestic politics in different parts of the world, but also in informational influencing and meddling into domestic politics to other countries. So there is disinformation, misinformation, propaganda, and all of that, which I will not get into here, but it's important to note that this is not just any of us, seeking a meaning in the internet. There is also malicious influencing and conscious conspiracy politics taking place. And then if we talk about translocality, there might be same memes circulating in different parts of the world, but their implications and strength and power depend on the strength of epistemic institutions and the level of trust on them in society. Nordic countries still are fairly stable for historical reasons. For instance, trust in journalism and educational institutions is fairly high, which I will not get into in detail. So where do we go from here then? I think that this idea of epistemic capital and the situation where we have epistemic contestation consciously, it leads into a situation that has been called epistemic instability. And I think that the epistemic instability has consequences to how we understand modernization, how we think of secularization theory. I think that there are methodological and empirical implications. We need to have mixed method, interdisciplinary mixed method approaches and interdisciplinary collaboration to figure out what's taking place. And then we need to recognize local and cultural variations, need to take into account translocality. I quite like the concept, which I think Marvin at least has talked a lot about. And then I think we need to pay attention to the workings of the media environment as a whole. For instance, the circulatory meaning making processes taking place in the media environment where things move from platform to platform. But also we need to sustain empirical accuracy about platform specificity. And then I'll just throw it out there. What is our role as academics in legitimizing claims of special knowledge? And what's our role as scientists, academics, to when we are claiming that we have special knowledge in that our way of approaching the world is a type of legitimate special knowledge. And then I will like to give I was promised that I can have an ad here. I'm one of the 3 people who are editing a special issue on epistemic contestations in the hybrid media environment. It is for the Popular Communication, the International Journal of Media and Culture. And I'm editing the special issue with David G. Robertson and Patrick Burkhardt. And if you are interested, please contact me. And the deadline for abstracts is October 1st. So if you're at all interested, please contact me. And then just to let you know that together with Johanna Sumiala, we are beginning a new research project starting from beginning of September. We were funded by the Academy of Finland. We're very happy and proud about that. And we are working on a project called Mediatization of Religious Populism, Merelpo. And there are some of you present today who have actually promised to be part of the advisory board in this project. So I thank especially you. But now I would like to give the word to all of you and to ask for comments and questions and discussion.
Thank you, Katja, and also for your advertisement in the end. That was good to see that something is happening in this. This is a very exciting field of research. And I think Johanna, that was applause more than a question. So I would just I would like to ask you a question, Katja. Could you say something about how experience is a legitimate form of knowledge or epistemic capital, but intuition is not? I didn't quite get the difference between experience and intuition.
Well, experience in this context, it means something like, you know, well, obviously they are very close. This categorization is from David G. Robertson, so I kind of took that as it is and didn't really think of it. But I think intuition is something that kind of comes from inside of you as a feeling, and experience is something that you have actually encountered and experienced. Obviously, an experience can lead to lead into looking at the world from an intuitive perspective. But in experience, if you think of experts of experience, they are people who have encountered injuries, or they are in a vulnerable position, and then they are asked to become experts because they have this certain experience. So that's why I think that experience is both a legitimate and illegitimate form of knowledge, because when it comes closer to intuition, then it becomes to be illegitimate. But when it's something that you actually have, you've encountered violence, or you've had a traffic accident, then that might be an experience that can be legitimate form of knowledge. I think there is somebody has a good explanation. Philip has a good explanation to think of experience versus intuition. Question of repetition, I think. Yes, that's a good one. Experience can be repetible. Intuitions are, yes, could be singular, yes, and kind of epiphany type of things, rather than also maybe you could also think that experiences are more something that you experience in a physical world. Intuition, this is obviously a very theoretical thing, but the intuition is something that takes place in your head. It can be a bodily intuition, but it kind of comes internally.
Okay, thank you, and thank you, Philip, for your explanation as well. Mike, you have a question?
Yeah, thank you. I wanted to just pick up on a phrase that's on one of your last slides. I think I know where you're going with it. I wanted to hear you explore more about it. Okay. Empirical accuracy about platform specificity.
Yes.
Tell me more about what you mean by that phrase and this platform specificity that we should be attentive to.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm very glad you asked that, because I wanted to talk more about that. We've looked at, you know, the mainstream social media, is things like Facebook and Twitter, very much Twitter, because it's so easy to collect data from Twitter. And obviously, those are algorithmic platforms. So algorithms have a lot to do in in terms of what people see, in terms of contents, who they meet in those networks, and all of that. It's AI that governs that, and kind of feeds us our previous behavior. Then there are platforms that are non-algorithmic, such as 4chan, 8chan, much of the dark web. There are discussion boards that they don't have algorithms, and the structure is very different, and also the communicative culture can be very different. So understanding that the way people behave on a certain platform has something to do with the platform culture and with the means of getting attention on that particular platform. There are people who consciously try to manipulate algorithms to give more attention to their posts. And then there are people on 4chan, for instance, who are trying to be more and more outrageous to get other people's attention. So in a way, being outrageous can be the way of getting attention on Facebook too, but it's different when there are also algorithms at play. This is just one example. There are plenty of examples how you should be aware of how these platforms are different. Then if we go to journalism and produced media, then there are again different types of logics logics at play in how it is possible to get attention, how it is possible to become a voice in the public, and they're different in different platforms, but nevertheless they are all interconnected, and I think that's also an important point.
Yes, thank you. So, okay, I just got a pop-up window right now. Let me just say if there's a question in the chat. You seen it, Katja?
Yes. So thank you. Can I call you Luna? Thank you, Luna, for your question. So liberation of the oppressed is a key term in liberation theology. Yes, by using it as one of the discourses in conspiracy theories, could it be a way of undermining the whole meaning of the term? Well, this is a very big question, and I think that liberation of the oppressed is a key term also in Marxist philosophy and many ideologies, but I think that the conspiracy theorists, well, it's a very bad term. Conspiracy theorist is a bad term, but people who are involved and influential in circles where conspiracy narratives are being circulated, they position themselves as somebody having special knowledge that can kind of relieve people of the oppression or liberate people of the oppression of the wrong knowledge. So kind of bringing them into light. And this is how I refer to that expression or term. So I'm not sure, maybe depending on a cultural context, I think that it could be in some context be used as a way of undermining the term liberation of the oppressed, but I can't say that I've seen that kind of usage in our data.
Okay, thank you very much, Katja, and also thank you to the other three presenters for presenting their papers here virtually today. And I would actually also like to thank you, Grace, for setting up and standing by during this first panel of the ISMRC online symposium